All right, peace, y'all. I'm waiting. I'm supposed to be doing a job right now, but I had a little time. So if I get cut short, I guess I'll just come back and finish. So hopefully I don't get cut too short. I wanted to talk about media, and impact of media, and just some things to point out. This Cosby situation, just all these situations, they have me thinking, and I just wanted to put something out there for you to think about when you're arguing with people on social media, um, with media. Now, a while back, when I first discovered the power of media, I remember listening to Malcolm X, and he talked about how Malcolm X talked about how the most powerful thing that existed was the media, and he discussed how you have going from World War I to World War II. I don't remember the exact countries, but he talked about how the media was able to be used as a tool to bring people's minds to hate these countries, and then the same country that they were friends with, the media was able to bring their minds to hate those countries immediately due to the power of media. And when I heard him point that out, I started to look at it, and I would say, hey, we need to really look at this and look at the power of it and understand that media is very important. So I said, okay, I turn on some media, I watch it. You see people, they make arguments, sometimes good, sometimes bad. Sometimes people are better than others. Hey, Grandma, how you doing? So we look at that. So I said, okay, this is the problem. I got caught up in the talking points. I got caught up in the dog and pony show as far as watching Fox News, watching the conservative versus the liberals, Bill O'Reilly versus this person. And it would always confuse me because I'd be like, look, there's two things. One, I would look at people would make arguments, and it's like some people would make weak arguments, some people would make strong arguments, right? Then there was some arguments just never even popped up at all. And I was like, look, how come this person can get on the TV and they make these weak arguments constantly, and it seems like no matter what, there's going to be a bunch of people who agree with them. And I kind of got caught up in that for a while, and then it like recently I kind of realized none of that. It doesn't matter the strength of your argument. It doesn't matter who says it. Don't get me wrong, these things matter a little bit. It matters a little bit what your argument it is. It matters a little bit who says it. But really, ultimately, when we're dealing with media, with a few exceptions, the only thing that matters is how big your megaphone is, how many people you can get to hear a particular point, okay, and for how long and how often. That's all that matters. How many people can you get to hear a particular point, and for how long and how often? That is the only thing that matters when it comes to media, because you could be on the lower side, okay? Let's say, for instance, Black Division, whatever, it's a media company. How many views and how many eyeballs can I get on what I'm doing compared to people who have larger platforms? You know what I mean? Like, for instance, I'll give you some examples. So ABC. ABC is worth about $30 billion. $30 billion. Like, we don't even have people that's worth $1 million, right? And then let's look at, for instance, another example. Let's look at CBS. How much is CBS worth? It was hard for me to find out. However, it doesn't really matter how much CBS is worth, because CBS is under the umbrella of Viacom. And Viacom has about, 60, they got like 60 billion in assets, something like that. Companies that are underneath them. So when you deal with CBS, you deal with Viacom, and you're dealing with, and that's just assets that they own. Like Disney, for instance. Disney owns ESPN, and I believe it's not ABC. I just mentioned that. It's one of these other media companies. So you're dealing with Viacom that owns all of these companies. And in Disney, they own 96 billion in assets. Now, this is not worth. I mentioned ABC's worth. We're dealing with the amount of assets that they own. So when somebody owns 96 billion in assets, that's like companies and other things that are underneath them, cash holdings that they owned. So if they own this many things, their worth is off the charts. If they own this many things, their worth is off the charts as a media company. So you're looking at these media companies, you're comparing that to where you are. You're comparing the megaphone, something that not only are they in all the TVs, on all the social medias, and not only do they have weight and sway with all of these different companies, they have the ability to do what I said earlier, which is what? They can constantly bash into your head using billions of dollars in resources and assets. They can constantly bash a message over and over and over again, and it doesn't matter how well they do it per se. Even though you want to do it the best that you can, but when it's compared to someone smaller, it doesn't matter how well you do, it just matters how often and how many eyeballs you can get on it, okay? Why do I bring this up? There's a lot of people who think the solutions to a lot of our problems as people is, hey, listen, instead of, complaining about what they're doing with the media, why don't we just make our own media channels? Why don't we just do our own whatever? And this is like, look, man, yes, 100% we should do that. Absolutely, but you got two problems with that situation. All right, so one problem you have in the system that you're in, as soon as something gets really big, it's going to be bought out. That's how Viacom owns so many things: MTV1, MTV2, Nickelodeon, BET. There's so many different things that you think are its own thing, VH1, that is actually owned by Viacom. Peace, Tony Hawkins. How you doing, brother? So as soon as you get to a certain point, Bob Johnson, BET, immediately people who can they can afford to pay out the short-term billion, 2 billion, 3 billion, whatever you think is a lot of money. You heard me a second ago. I told you Disney has 96 billion in assets and crazy amount of cash on hand. They're thinking in terms of, listen, there's people in the Disney boardroom that don't give a damn. $1 billion is nothing. They've been billionaires for not just the 80 years they've been alive. Their parents before that had that kind of money. You understand? So when they think of money, they think in terms of long term. You're thinking of the next, like, you're advanced as a black person if you plan out 5-10 years. They're planning out things like 20, 100 years in advance. So you could have an angle that you came up with, like a black targeted media, BET. They'll take that with a plan and give you more than it's worth now, because they're looking at what they can do with it over the next 40 years. You don't necessarily have the ability to look at it like that. So they buy these things out. You come up with these things. There's people who think, I'm 100% for black business, so don't get it twisted. But for the people who think starting a black business, you start a black business, don't complain about it. Don't complain about Disney having 96 billion in assets. Once you start a black business, and before you die, hopefully you can get it to be worth 100 million, 200 million, best case scenario. That is not necessarily the answer, Yes, it's important to think of generational wealth. Tony, and I'm glad you said that, because we got to think of generational wealth going forward, right? So we have to, we got to think generational wealth going forward. It's definitely something you have to have in mind. But you also have to consider the generational wealth that got you to this point. And when you think generational wealth going forward, the number one thing you can have before you build any type of wealth is you need security. What I'm trying to explain to people is that your media is not secure. Your businesses are not secure when you have independent people standing out by themselves. Like when you hear, this is another thing too. When people talk black business, and this is kind of turning into the black business argument, but it's all the same. When people think black business, you're thinking of a small business that's being done by like an individual person or a family or these things. This is done all over America by all different groups of people everywhere. But the real things that run America are corporations. So when you hear Disney, it might be 12 people in that boardroom and some other major shareholders or major partners of these companies. This is old white money from different families for years that been, it's been passed down, and they have major assets and major cash and major wealth, all working together. So you're talking billions. Even if Disney just holds that, you're not even considering what each person that's on the boardroom in Disney is holding. You see? There's billions. This stuff is way bigger than if you best case scenario were able to come up with a media company or something like that, and you don't get bought up, or your children don't get bought out, because as Tony Hawkins mentioned, this is a general wealth long-term game. So if you don't get bought out or your children don't get bought out, there's so many other people involved in these movements, so where it's way larger than you're thinking. Okay? So what is my point in bringing it up? I don't want to bring it up to make people think that, okay, everything is just completely hopeless. I just don't want you to seek comfort in this simplistic answer like, oh, well, hey, all you got to do, hey, they got NBC, we just need a black NBC. It doesn't work like that. First of all, NBC, that's 30 billion. You're not even close to that. Okay? Now, where does this come in? Where does this tie into me saying, as a reason that we need our own country? Recently, and I don't want to use Bill Cosby. I don't want people to get triggered because it really doesn't matter. Just insert black, formidable person. A big black person, doesn't matter. All they have to do there is if this person does not work in the interest of them and those corporations and those white boys in those boardrooms, all they have to do is put out a mass media campaign. Like think about for instance, think about Super Bowl commercials, right? I know the Super Bowl is the most watched thing, but just to give you an example, a commercial that's 30 seconds might cost them 10, 5 million just to do it. Each one of those seconds in that time is very valuable. So when you have a $30 billion company, ABC, or a company like Disney that has ESPN and all these other things that have $96 billion in assets, each minute and each second of that time, each one of those programs that they run and all the different places they can get those eyeballs, whether it be social media, television, overseas, everywhere, these are millions of dollars of slots, an hour slot. So when what is the place? I forget what it's called. CNN, when they do an hour documentary on Bill Cosby with crying victims constantly in your face, boom, boom, boom. You're running that for an hour. That's millions of dollars. Then they're pushing it behind, using the name and everything they put to put it on social media to constantly run the little small clips. YouTube, boom, 2 million views, 3 million views. They're doing these things. That's millions and millions of dollars at work. This is millions and millions of dollars at work. This is old money, generational wealth at work. You see what I'm saying? This is more than just, this goes way deeper than like what one person or one disciplined family can put together. Like, oh, no, we just got to work hard and we'll have an NBC just like, no. You're going up against way more than you see, man. You know, it's like, cause when people say, like, for instance, there's the spiritual type of spin on the saying when you hear someone say, hey, I'm not just right here. My ancestors are here standing with me. Now, you could take the spiritual or the spooky kind of metaphysical, and I don't want to call it spooky like it's always wrong, but you could take that interpretation of it. But you know what? There's also there is a physical manifestation of your ancestors being right here with you when their wealth and resources of the blood and the money and all the sacrifice and all the work and all the generations of people doing what you're telling people to do right now. There's a physical manifestation of that, you see, and that's the money that you have. So you have to look at that also. All right, so getting back to, so my point is, when you have a situation where even if you start your own media, even if you have your own stuff, right, you have a situation where the whole media apparatus, due to all the things they have and how they can work together, is controlled. It's controlled. Like, even think of your favorite independent YouTube media. Hopefully you're watching some independent media. If you notice, they are even swayed by the general talking points that mass media puts out. Because if they don't talk about what's trending right now based on what the main major media people have done, they won't get any attention. So you're still controlled by that. You still run the risk of being bought out by that. And if mainstream media, and if you don't acquiesce to what mainstream media wants, things pretty much fall off. So instead of thinking, look, definitely control. Right? So now instead of thinking, look, let me control, instead of my mentality being, hey, let me start a black business, let me start a black business and maybe I can beat them at their own game. I think the mentality we need to take on as a more viable option if we have our own nation. You have your own country. See, in a country, you can control how these things come into your media. Okay? When you go to Iran, they don't allow all the Western media. As a country, like for instance, even in this nation here, before a movie goes out into major theaters and it goes out on too large of a level, they have to check in. The FBI basically is federally regulated what they put out. If you have your own country where you control the laws, you can make sure that regardless of the fact that there's this big, massive behemoth over in America, we still have the legal control over this land or what goes over our airwaves. Okay? We have the legal control over this land, what goes over our airwaves. Now, I don't want to say that to be naive to think that even if you try to block all these outside forces out, you're not going to be able to fully block them all the way out. But what I'm saying is you have the control legally, okay, through not just the media that you're able to put through. Not just like, okay, hey, look, we can create these TV shows, we can do this, but you have control over the schools. There's kids, like you can do the doll test with your kid before they even make it to school, before they even understand fully the media that's on TV, and they're already failing the doll test because they're being programmed from day one. So that's not just media, and that's before they get to school. Now imagine after they actually make it to school. They get into school, and then they get another programming that they're doing, and then that's running coinciding with the media that they're getting. If you have your own country, you can change these things. So now you actually sit down and make the whole curriculum for your own schools in your country, and legally these other things can't seep in to the degree that they can seep in here. People say, like, they talk about the school. If we just make our own schools, see, listen, man, you can't take these small problems. Like, you're coming up with $100,000 solutions to multi-billion-dollar problems. $100,000 solutions to multi-billion-dollar problems. So I think it's more viable. I know it sounds crazy that you could get your own country, but you have a better chance at solving these type of problems if instead of thinking in that direction of taking over this mass $100 billion behemoth, you get your own land and you can control the environment, you can control the situations to where you will limit the amount of what comes in. You can limit the media, you can direct it in whichever way that you want. Now, I guess I could go in a lot of different directions, but I think I made my general point. But yeah, and I'm waiting on these people here, but I don't know. So I got a little bit more time, but I think I said everything I need to say. I don't see no questions, so I'll get with y'all later, man. Peace. He said debriefing our kids is very important. Okay, no, that wasn't a question.